Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Hello. I just wanted to bring you a little review today of this little machine. This is the Singer knitting machine. This machine I recently purchased because I will be hand dyeing some yarn and I wanted to be able to knit up some blanks so that I can create really long colorways, long transitions for knitting and crochet. And I thought this would be a useful tool not only for worsted weight or DK yarn but also for doing sock blanks. So I purchased this machine and I have to say I kind of like it. This machine comes with a crochet hook and a tapestry needle, which they call a knitting hook, and a knitting needle or a knit needle on the box. But it comes with just your standard, I think it's a 3.75 millimeter plastic hook, which is okay. And then this is just your standard tapestry needle. I like this needle. It has a large eyelet here, so the yarn is easy to feed through. This machine also came with 2 skeins of, I would say, DK weight yarn, or very light worsted yarn. It's a good yarn to practice with on this machine. You get a feel for how the machine works, and yeah, it comes with a lot of things. So I purchased this at Joann's Fabric. I used a 40% off coupon and got it for $25, which I think is actually a great deal. This is marketed as a toy, so this is made entirely of plastic. The mechanics inside, guaranteed, are all made of plastic. There's the crank handle, which if you've ever seen any other type of circular knitting machine, you'll know that they have a crank handle. They have the needles here, which you can see the shape is a hook here with a little bit of a belly at the bottom of the needle so that the stitch will slip down onto the holders. This is the yarn loading receptacle. I don't know what to call it. It's where you load your yarn. You always want to make sure that when you open it, you load your yarn and then you close it, because this gate being open could break a needle. And then here, there are 2 settings. There's circular knitting and then panel knitting. Now, one drawback to this machine, I feel like I'm always going to break this switch. I actually bought 2, well, I purchased one machine, I returned it and exchanged it for a newer one, but the machine that I purchased first got broken very easily, and I don't know if it had to do with me flipping the switch and experimenting with it, or if I was using too heavy of a yarn, which I don't think was the case, or it was just a defective machine. So this will press up. Oh, very loud click. And it will only go for a certain time before the handle stops. You never want to force it, and then you can knit backwards until the handle stops. So that is the panel knitting. I prefer to use it in the circular knitting. Oh, I hate doing that. The circular knitting, you can just continually knit around and around and around. Now, this machine has changed a bit. There was an older version of this machine, which was a handheld machine, which I've seen in a lot of yarn dyeing tutorials here on YouTube and other machine knitting tutorials on YouTube, doing reviews of it. It was not a very good machine. It had a closed loading dock where you had to feed it through a tube, which made loading the machine kind of difficult. And it also was very clicky. It goes click, 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 click. Now this machine is very smooth. It has pretty much no sound as long as you're using the appropriate weight yarn, and it loads easily, and it looks a lot like the Addi professional machines. If you've ever done any research on YouTube about professional knitting machines, circular knitting machines, you'll notice that this looks very similar. The hooks are similar, the style is similar, the feet are similar, and I think it was made to be very closely modeled after that machine. I do want to say that I like it. I think that the mechanics work very well for what it is. It is plastic. You want to treat it with care. But I've been able to knit up these little preemie hats that I'm going to be donating to a local hospital here where I had my children. They knit up very well, well enough to donate. You can see, you know, sometimes there's like a bunched stitch or a slipped stitch where it was slipped and then knit over again. But for the most part, the work that comes out of this machine is pretty good. You just have to take it slower and you have to pay attention to what's happening on your machine. So I want to show you here how I load on the machine. This is the Caron Simply Soft in the off-white color. Now I've marked needles here. This machine doesn't have any indication of a starting needle. And I don't like that. I want to know where I'm going to be starting each time and where I need to stop. And it also helps when you're in the flat panel knitting to know where your needles are that aren't going to be loaded with any yarn. So you know where to begin your flat panel and where to end your flat panel. So I've marked here, this is the center needle, or of these three, 1, 2, 3, this is the center point, so this is where I always like to start. So for loading your yarn, you always want to make sure that your shuttle here is closed. And when you cast on, you are hooking your yarn onto the first needle and you're alternating back and forth. So behind, in front, behind, in front, behind. So this is the last needle. The next needle here is the first needle that I loaded with the yarn. And so because this is going behind the needle, I'm going to make sure it is underneath this small lip of the machine. Turn the crank just slightly because I want to make sure that this stays down. I'm going to load my yarn in. There's a small hole here. Oops, sorry. There's a small hole here where you place your yarn into. Close completely, and then you can begin knitting. Now this machine doesn't like to have much tension on it with the loading yarn. If there's too much tension here, the machine will start to go click, 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 click because it's struggling to push the stitch down off of the needle and onto the small stitch holders that are here. So especially when you're doing your first few rows, you want to make sure you pull out some yarn so that you have it readily available with very little tension. You can regulate some tension by just draping it over your finger if you prefer. I just prefer to hold my machine. Another drawback of this machine is that they're just plastic feet. It doesn't come with anchors. It doesn't come with anything to stop it from moving. So I've just taken a mat that you would use under your silverware drawer to keep it from moving here so that I have a nice firm base so I can hold the machine, crank, and the machine won't move anywhere. This also works on my dining table or my wood floor. Right now I'm on the carpet to show this demonstration. But I've also seen people put command strips underneath the feet of these here so that they can mount it to a table and then or some kind of work surface so that they can have it permanently or temporarily attached somewhere. But I prefer to have it like this for now because I move this around the house where I need it. I have 2 small children, so I want to keep this out of reach. So I'm going to begin here by knitting my first row. What's going to happen is the crankset will turn and the needles will come up and down as they come along this section. The upward motion will push the stitch off of the hook and behind the needle, and then the downward motion will catch this yarn here and knit the stitch. So as it comes along, it will push the stitch off and knit the stitch down. Push the stitch off, knit the stitch down. So it's very important that you continually rotate the handle in the same direction. If you begin to rotate in the opposite direction, what will happen is you'll drop a stitch where the needle will come up, drop the stitch behind, and then if you push the handle backwards, the stitch will fall off and will not get knit. So you have to be careful to always knit in the same direction when you're doing circular knitting. So pick a direction. If you're going to knit this way, knit this way. If you're going to knit this way, backwards, it's hard to tell which way I'm going. You're going to push the handle in this direction or push the handle in this direction. Only one way. So here for this first row, I'm making sure that the yarn back here has fallen behind this small thingamabobby, this small lip here, so that it holds the yarn. I'm going to give just a small amount of tension for this first stitch, and you'll see that the machine picks the stitch and knits it under. So now I'm going to rotate. As the stitch gets knit under, it falls behind here and gets held in place underneath this small lip. So I'm just going to continue knitting this first row. The first row sometimes is the hardest because when you cast on your yarn, you tend to do a little bit tighter than what you would normally be knitting. So here we go. We've already made it around back to the last hook that we put the yarn around. So now we're going to continue knitting for a few rows. Okay, so now I've made several revolutions. You can count here how many rows we've done. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, around 14 rows. You can see that the knit panel looks pretty consistent. Right now I'm just going to pull this tail of yarn to make a little bit of tension underneath the machine so that it's easier to see the rows. But you can see that the stitch tension is really important. You can see down here there are tighter stitches that happened when the yarn was pulling directly from the skein. I stopped and pulled out a bunch of yarn to reduce the tension, and the tension changed here. So you can see where it has changed, but it's very, very minor. It's something that's easily kind of stretched and manipulated to make it much more even like this. So this machine, I find it knits up really well as long as you're using the right kind of weight yarn. Caron Simply Soft is a really good yarn to use in this because it's a lighter weight worsted yarn. I think it is a 4. It's labeled as a 4, but I feel like Simply Soft runs smaller gauge-wise than your typical worsted weight yarn like Red Heart yarn. So you could use, I think it's Red Heart Soft or Caron Simply Soft, or another yarn. It does work up all right with a solid, standard worsted weight yarn, but the first few rows tend to be difficult and the machine may click. So you always want to make sure you have a little bit of tension here, pulling your work away from these stitch holders so that the stitches don't bunch. If you have a weight that you can place on your work, it will definitely help. Now, when I'm making a yarn blank, I'm not going to worry about winding my edges in or making sure that things are perfectly knit or correcting drop stitches on the machine. I'm just going to worry about knitting the whole entire skein and making a full blank so that I can dye it appropriately. But if you are casting off, I do want to show you that. So I'm going to finish knitting up the hat I'm going to make, and I will show you how to cast off the stitches. So I'm going to fast forward through here. Hopefully it goes relatively quickly and without too many problems. So we're gonna pretend like these mistakes don't exist right now. I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing, so I have a huge over knit dropped section where the yarn fell off of the hooks and I knit over what I was doing, so the work will not come apart, but you have missed stitches in here. This does happen with this machine from time to time. Again, it is a toy. It's not made to be a professional knitting machine, but it works well enough for if you're making things for donation, or if your kids want to practice doing machine knitting, or if you're just making die blanks, this machine works just fine. I just didn't have the wherewithal to spend the money on a professional machine. So here I've ended at a random place. I've clipped my yarn so that it is ready to be woven into the ends. You're going to open your carriage, remove the yarn. My last stitch that I want to knit is this stitch right here, since it's farther down, the carriage is farther down. So I'm going to knit it, and then what I will do is hold this yarn and I will just watch where this is and have it come all the way over to the other side right before the needles are going to come up. And thread my needle. This needle is pretty nice. It has a big wide opening so you don't have to fiddle or wet the yarn. Here it is on the needle, and now I'm going to insert my hook. This is the stitch, the last stitch that I knit, so I'm going to go into the next stitch and pull it onto my needle and pull it through. These first couple will be a little tight, so it's easy to do them one at a time. Again, put my needle under this stitch, pull it onto my needle and pull my yarn through. Now I can start to do multiple cast offs here, so I'm going to insert my needle, pull it through, and then the last stitch, insert and pull it off. So there you go, you have knit a tube. You can see here the mistakes. I was going too fast. I was just trying to put yarn on so that I could show you how to take it off. But if you're knitting slower and you're paying attention, you really do want to take your time and watch what's happening with your yarn so that you can catch mistakes like this and fix them. There are tutorials on YouTube on how to fix a dropped stitch, how to pull it back onto the needle, or if you've already knit through it, how to correct it for the next row. So when you're pulling your stitch back around after you've already knit the drop stitch, you can actually adjust it and fix it right there. If you do have a drop stitch like this, as long as you don't fully cast off your work, you can follow and re-knit your drop stitch by using the crochet hook and pulling up, pulling up, pulling up, pulling up until you can finally pull it back up onto your machine. So paying attention is really important, and especially for this machine, this isn't the most high quality machine, so mistakes will happen. But in general, I've had a really easy time. I've knit over 40 caps on this machine, and most of them turn out just like this, where I'm taking my time, I can see what's happening, and most of the time I don't have errors to correct. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. I do enjoy this machine. I don't think it's a professional machine. I definitely think it's made to be a toy, marketed to be a toy, but it does work very well for what it is. As long as you're using the correct weight yarn, you're taking your time, and you treat it with care, because the materials are plastic. Plastic materials tend to break pretty easily, especially things like this rocker switch here, where, you know, you're going to turn it and it's pressing really hard and all of a sudden you hear click. You know, that anxiety you get, oh no, I've just snapped off a piece. So you want to take it very easy, very gently. It's good to get a feel for machine knitting. Or if you're only going to be using it for something like dyeing blanks, like sock blanks or worsted weight blanks, then this is the perfect type of machine. It's around $30 to $40. It, at least at the time of filming, I don't know how much it would be if you're going to purchase it, but where I am, it was around that much. And it works well for what it is. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any comments or questions for me, please leave them in the comment section down below. I'm happy to answer. I'm a novice at this machine knitting, but I found it very easy to pick up, easy to learn, and I've seen a lot of really cool things done on knitting machines where you're knitting in the round and you can alternate in different colors of yarn, or you can, do ribbing where you intentionally drop a stitch and then re-knit it. So you have the purl side on this side and then you're knitting so that you create a ribbing at the bottom of the hat. Or you can make socks on this type of machine where you're knitting in the round, and then you can stop and add stitches in a panel and then decrease and then continue knitting. It's really actually quite cool. So if you haven't seen any tutorials, I definitely suggest looking them up. A lot of them are done on the AliExpress, the professional machine. So anyway, I've droned on long enough. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!